Do you feel there's enough resources available for these different cultural groups and people on low income? Welcome to the Be Well podcast, wellness backed by science, bringing you inspiring conversations to help you on your wellness journey to a healthier, happier you. Brought to you by Breast Cancer UK. You can start your personal prevention journey right now by taking our prevention quiz. Just click on the link in the show notes. Hello and welcome to the Be Well podcast. I'm Tali Martini, CEO of Breast Cancer UK, and my guest today is an NHS GP who's been in clinical practice for over 20 years, and she's also an award-winning food content creator. What makes her unique is her passion and her expertise in lifestyle and nutrition medicine, which she uses to support families, no matter their background, time, or financial constraints, to cook from scratch. Now, that's particularly daunting for some of us, but her special talent is in helping bring her warm nutrition theory to everyday kitchens and to dinner tables. And she believes that this is where families can share healthier and happier lives. Now, this is, of course, music to our ears at Breast Cancer UK, or should I say food for thought, because we share this passion for nutrition, and that's because it plays an important role in transforming our health, but also can protect us from diseases such as breast cancer. And that's what we are all about, is looking at ways in which we can reduce breast cancer risk. Now, last year, my guest published her hugely popular book, Dr. Chintal's Kitchen, where she shares enticing, time-saving kitchen tips and advice on how to get those picky eaters to broaden their palate and really just to start loving food. This is going to be a truly scrumptious chat. So without any further ado, I am delighted to welcome Dr. Chintal Patel to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today, Chintal.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a delight, and I'm really keen to launch straight into some questions around really your background. So you're a registered NHS doctor, but you're also a food content creator. So that's an interesting mix of things. How has being a doctor actually influence the way that you think about food?
So I think it's actually underpins everything that I do. I think my understanding of disease and also the science of nutrition actually work really well together. It helps me to kind of focus on what actually helps patients. So rather than kind of focusing on foods, trends, new things that are coming around, I always go back to my understanding and the science behind disease and nutrition, and try and incorporate them into everything that I do.
Wonderful. And so you wanted to combine your passion for cooking and medicine. What was it that you were trying to achieve in doing that? And who exactly are the people who you think will most benefit from that?
So for me, it's about kind of giving my knowledge and what I've found helpful, because I found when I became a mum, I was kind of all of a sudden responsible for these two new humans, and I wanted them to have the best possible start to life. And so, that's when I started learning more about it. And then I realized that actually I could translate a lot of that into my general practice, everyday general practice with patients, because quite often people know what they need to do, or they've heard of what they might need to do, but it's the how to put it into practice. That often is a stumbling block. People don't know, how to interpret what they might have read online or what they've learned or what their doctors told them into real life in their kitchen. So that's where I thought, there's a need for kind of practical, simple recipes that translate that medical advice into, real life scenarios in your kitchen, what you can do at home. And that's where I want to help. I would love to reach out to those people that may not have those resources or may not, be able to access information, and kind of reach out to those everyday people and teach them how to translate that medical science into practical tips.
So is this something you share with your patients? So you have patients who'll come to you for various issues. Is that part of your intervention, is to talk nutrition and in the kitchen? Do you dig into that with your patients?
I work in the NHS, so time is always a constraint, obviously, but I will try and weave in lifestyle medicine into everything that I do. It just comes naturally because actually, like I said, that basic understanding underpins a lot of what health is. So yes, I'll always try and incorporate it in somehow. It might not be me sharing a recipe, but it might just be a simple tip sometimes. But yes, definitely, it's part of my consultation.
And do you get a sense when you speak to your patients, because I suppose that's your coalface, isn't it? That's where you're going to get to know people in your community. Do you get a sense when you speak to them about, how much they understand about nutrition?
Yeah, I mean, I work in central London, so I have a real mixed bag of patients. So I have the kind of very, very aware, very wealthy population. But then that's also, being in central London, I also have the kind of lower socioeconomic groups. So that might not perhaps kind of have access to information, to what's out there. And also working with kind of minority groups as well, that you have to think slightly differently when approaching minority groups into culturally what's appropriate for them. So yeah, I've totally forgotten what the question was there, where I was.
No, it's more understanding when you meet your patients, as you say, you've got a variety of patients who come to you, different backgrounds, different cultures. Do you manage to get a sense of what the kind of nutritional literacy is like generally?
I mean, that's what I was trying. The point I was trying to make. It's so different for different groups, and sometimes you have to tailor it to that group. So where I've got those, I don't really have a middle. I seem to work with people that really know, and then people that actually have very limited knowledge. And sometimes you have to tailor your advice, obviously appropriately to which group you're speaking to at that point.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one of the things we work a lot on at Breast Cancer UK is supporting people to develop their own prevention journey. That's what we call it. So we have a quiz. People take the quiz, they answer questions. Some of it's about their lifestyle, some of it's about their family history. And out comes some recommendations for them for things that they can change to help reduce their risk. And we really believe that it's about giving everybody an element of control over their health. And good nutrition and understanding how to have good nutrition is a big part of having that control. But from a GP's perspective, do you feel that food actually can be a good supplement for your GP intervention? So, for example, someone comes with some kind of ailment or risk of disease. Do you feel that food actually is a good supplement for the other interventions that you might offer as a GP?
I mean, absolutely. If we look at a lot of chronic disease, which is pretty much bread and butter what I see in general practice, things like type 2 diabetes, obesity, they're all very much linked with food. And we know that food and lifestyle can have a huge impact on those particular diseases. So, 100% we can use food as a tool to supplement the medications. If we just take something very simple like type 2 diabetes or obesity, having that patient have education around food, seeing a dietitian, a specialist dietitian, makes a huge difference to the control of those diseases. So actually, if we can empower people to cook more from scratch, to think about what they're feeding themselves, we could decrease preventable diseases and improve chronic disease, definitely, which in a way will then reduce burden on the NHS and maybe give us that ability to do this more, which would be incredible, because at the moment it's not really that well funded. But if we could, put that funding back into actually educating patients and improving health and prevention rather than treating, that would be incredible, wouldn't it?
I completely agree. And actually, it's something we grapple with. You talked about funding for educating patients. Where do you think that funding needs to go? So yourself, you're at the front line. You're interacting directly with patients. So that's a perfect kind of teachable moment, is what we call it, isn't it? Where you're able to share with that patient opportunities for them to reduce their risk, and also the knock-on effect, obviously, is it can have an impact on reducing the burden on the NHS. But where do you think the best channels are for that education to happen? Is it your fellow healthcare professionals, or is there somewhere else that it needs to be happening and it's not happening?
I mean, that's a difficult one to explain, because I think people go searching out their own information a lot on the internet. And it's not easy to always see a GP. It's not easy, for me to get access for patients to be able to see specialist dietitians, for them to, access services even. And it's not the same across the country. Nationally, different groups of people will have access to different things and different services. So, I do think the internet actually is a place where people go to find information. And so it's important that there is trusted sources on the internet. And the NHS website tends to be accurate and up to date. But it doesn't have a huge amount about food and nutrition.
Yeah, no, that's right. So that's potentially a place. In fact, the kind of work that we do, yourself and Breast Cancer UK, there's an opportunity we've always felt for the NHS to link to the trusted websites where there's some good tools and information, because obviously the NHS has to prioritise key information, but then when it comes to that engaging educational piece, that tends to not happen so well. So I completely agree, there's more work to do there. But, you're busily doing this work yourself. You've got a wonderful cookbook that came out last year, as far as I know. And it's called Dr. Chintal's Kitchen. Oh, there it is, beautiful looking. So it'd be great to hear a bit more about this book. It makes the fundamentals of maintaining a healthy, balanced diet easy to understand. So I'd like to know how you go about doing that in the book. And firstly, also, what motivated you to write that book?
Yes, so what motivated me, I'll start with first. So I've been sharing these kind of recipes online for a long time. And, every time I did, people would say to me, do you have a book? Do you have a book? Because sometimes it's easier to see everything in one place. And where I share on Instagram and other social media, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, they're all kind of snapshots, aren't they? And they're quite hard to save things and then go back to things. And I was always getting questions of, where do, that thing you mentioned about 10 years ago, where can I find that? And so it's much easier to have everything in kind of one space, which is why I wrote the book. And the book is split into two elements. One, the first half is teaching you the basics of nutrition. And it was really important for me to keep it fairly basic, to keep it digestible, to keep it understandable, so that anybody can pick it up, read that first chapter and think, oh yeah, I understand. I know what carbohydrates, fats, proteins are. I know why certain foods are high in iron. I know why I shouldn't mix this and this, get that kind of how and why. And also a little bit about kind of how to balance your plate. So get people thinking about when they're cooking food themselves at home, rather than just following the recipe, how they might interpret it or how they might adapt things at home. So telling them, just the basics of how to balance your plate, what kind of things you should be thinking about, portion sizes, that kind of practical advice. And also, bearing in mind things like budget, people, vegetarian, vegan, cultural influence. So trying to put all that together in that first chapter. And then the second half is really bringing that theory into practice in your kitchen. So quick, easy, healthy recipes to show you how to bring that in. And within those recipes, I try and cater for vegetarians and vegans as well. So in there is always a make it vegetarian box, make it vegan box if the recipe already isn't. And obviously, I'm a big advocate for more plant-based eating. So I have an entire chapter that's called Meat-Free Monday, and it is just vegetarian recipes, although I do add a little box there as well to if somebody wanted to switch it back, because I know that people have different tastes, and I just really wanted to be very inclusive of that, because I think if you're too prescriptive about this is how you need to eat, this is what you should be doing, and that's it, you're not going to capture everybody. And I think it's really important to have that slight flexibility in your approach.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it kind of speaks to this whole idea of people kind of building their own program, building their own prevention journey, but having those options available to them, but also looking at, well, I'm normally a meat person. I can see there's vegan. I wouldn't normally go for the vegan recipe, but the fact that there's a vegan option, I might give that a try,
it does make a lot more sense, and it feels very different to how recipe books have always been, because rightly so, people who write recipe books, they have they've worked on their style of cooking, and they have a strong belief system around the cooking that they want to share with people. So it will be very focused on a particular angle. It might be just vegetarian or just meat or fish or so on. But it feels much more inclusive, as you say, to accept that actually it should be starting with the reader and giving them the options to look at things that suit them. What kind of response have you had from your readers?
Yeah, very positive. It's been lovely, actually. I get a lot of photographs of people cooking, a lot of photographs of remakes, of recipes that they've made. But one thing that's really touched me, even a couple of weeks ago, I was demonstrating at the Good Food Festival, and I didn't realise, but this little girl that came to watch the demo, I remember meeting her, and I remember her parents buying the book after the show. But it was incredible. They put this post on social media that I'm not in this particular mums group where they put it, but I had so many messages saying, you've got to look at this post and screenshot this post. And this little girl had been inspired straight away to go home. She was reading the book on her way home in the car, and she'd started cooking from it. And, her mum and dad said, this is amazing. Like, was so inspired by just listening to that talk, and she wanted to go away and make things. And, there were these photographs of things that she'd made straight away that day, which, it was incredible. And it just making that difference to one person just makes me think, wow, like if you can have that impact through just a simple presentation in a book, that would be incredible. And that's how I would just love to reach people. And I'm hoping that's how it's been received in the homes where it's arrived.
Yeah, it sounds like it, definitely. And, the other thing that is important for us at Breast Cancer UK is sharing information around a healthy, balanced diet. We talk about it all the time because, and it's great to see young people getting into it, because it really is about putting in place lifestyle habits and so on that can help reduce risk of disease. And in our case, we talk more specifically about breast cancer. So that's one of the reasons we've launched our new supper club called Full. And the supper club aims to fill our bodies and also our social connections through healthy food, to show that good food's not only filling, but it's also fulfilling. The thing that we're trying to achieve with the supper club is to, change this perception around healthy food being boring. Do you feel that out there generally people still feel that if it's healthy, it's going to be boring and dull? And how do you tackle that in your recipes?
Yeah, I think so. I think healthy food always has that label attached to it. And, I see even on my own social media, if I post a chocolate cake, because I'm all about everything in moderation, then, it has lots more interaction, lots more reaction to posting something that is perhaps, your everyday meal. But at the same time, my focus is always on kind of switching that and how we can move away from that label, because healthy food doesn't have to be boring. And I try my hardest to kind of incorporate lots more variety. I try and add lots more spices. I use a lot of kind of global influence from places that I've traveled to, places I might have visited, my children's input. So I try and kind of make recipes and healthy recipes a bit more interesting. And I think also just having that balanced approach to it. So I'm very much about, incorporating everything into your meal, and focusing on adding things to your meal. And so I think that just gives you enough kind of a twist to make it a little bit more interesting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do talk a lot about food and the need for a balanced diet. And, we've talked about how, first of all, there's this need to change the perception of good, healthy food being boring. But then it's also not a quick fix, is it? It's about maintaining those healthy habits once you start to put them into place. Is that something you address in your book? How do you help people build that knowledge so that they can start to create their own kind of sustainable long-term approaches to cooking and healthy eating.
Yeah, I think for me, the one take-home message that I hope comes through is focusing on what you can include in your diet rather than what you take out of your diet. And then naturally, things will just fall into place. So whenever I'm talking to people about, changes that they might want to make, I always say, don't go radical. Don't, give this big overhaul to your diet. Just focus on small, sustainable inclusions in your diet, small, sustainable changes that you can then maintain long term. So what could you add that you didn't add before that you think you could keep adding for a while? And just that little small change long term. And focusing on it in that way allows you to just naturally maybe switch up that ratio of I don't want to say good versus bad, because I don't think any foods are bad. But the more healthier options, you'll just naturally switch it up if you just focus more on getting more variety and inclusion rather than exclusion.
You've talked about adding rather than taking away, and that's a really interesting idea. And I think when people are motivated to make changes to their diet, they might be more susceptible to fads where they're encouraged to cut out certain food groups. What do you advise your readers on this?
Don't do it. But fad diets and, and I think we're also looking at some of those kind of really extreme diets. First of all, they're really difficult to maintain. So, I look online at some of these kind of carnivore diets that only eat meat and butter and, cutting out whole food groups like carbohydrates, things like that. You're going to really miss out on key nutrients. Carbohydrates could be anything from broccoli to, oats. Like, you're going to miss out on massive nutrients by kind of cutting out huge food groups. Secondly, they're really hard to sustain long term. Cutting out huge parts of your diet actually is difficult. It's hard, especially if you're not fully cooking from scratch, because there is just, going to be a little bit of this, a little bit of this in a lot of what you eat. And I think, if you're not going to be able to sustain these changes long term, and a lot of these fad diets don't even have a huge evidence base behind them. In fact, they probably have a negative evidence base behind them. So I steer away from that and just follow really basic principles of nutrition, just trying to incorporate more plant-based foods into your diet, trying to incorporate more variety into your diet, thinking about things like fiber and protein, and just slowly, like I said, including more into your diet rather than excluding.
Yeah, absolutely. But also we do start to talk about, the more we understand about how the gut works, for example, the more we start to talk about other elements such as the microbiome. And that seems to be something that we certainly are looking more into at Breast Cancer UK, but is being discussed a lot more by nutritionists, because there's some evidence to show that it can help reduce the risk of serious illness. And there's also studies that suggest that it could have a positive impact on breast cancer risk as well. So can you share some tips for how to look after our gut? What are some of the benefits of maintaining a healthy gut? And is that gut microbiome? And is that something that you address a bit in your book as well?
Yes, it is. Your gut microbiome are these trillions and trillions of microorganisms that are all throughout your guts, from your mouth down to your anus, so all throughout. And we now know, and there is so much more research coming out, but we know that they are involved in pretty much everything in your body, from your immunity, from cancer risk, as you said, from chronic disease, lots and lots of things. They control, a vast amount of body processes, and we're learning more and more every day. So it's really, really important to keep that gut microbiome happy. And there are lots of ways that you can do that, but actually, if you break it down to basics, it's once again going back down to something really simple like fiber. And even that fiber, it is actually about variety of fiber. So once again, we're going back to just incorporating lots more variety of plant-based ingredients into your meals, because fiber is found in plant-based foods. And by plant-based, I'm talking about anything that's grown. So that could be down to your oats, to your wheat, to broccoli and carrots. That wide range and variety is key to keeping your gut microbiome happy. So the more you include, again, the more variety you include, the happier it's going to be.
And one of the things that you talk about actually is being able to include that rich variety of food, but even on a budget. Mm-hmm. How do you address that? And actually, I've noticed as well that you do talk about having recommended a meal at just 50p. So for an audience who are struggling financially, what are some of the tips that you can offer to enable them to still have access to that variety of food and nutrition?
Yeah, so I think one thing that's important to address is that budget isn't just about the cost of the meal. I think access, and I'm talking about access to getting to the supermarket, perhaps access to electricity, to a cooker, to, cooking methods, to pots and pans. There's so much more than just meal swaps or how you can make a healthy recipe. So I go into this with kind of I think we need to view it as an overall as well. So whilst I can write a 50p recipe book, it isn't actually always even accessible for people to make that. So there is absolutely no judgment in what I say. And I can see why some of my patients would resort to a ready-made pizza that costs £1 in Tesco than picking up ingredients to make that 50p meal, because actually, they might not have the resources to even get to the supermarket on time after work, it's closed, or they might not have appropriate cooking appliances at home. So I think there's a lot more than just the food. But if I was trying to give you ways of cooking on a budget, some really simple things that I could suggest is trying to do meat swaps. So actually, meat is quite expensive. So if you are someone that enjoys adding meat products to your diet, try swapping to kind of cheaper cuts of meat. So often if you're cooking with chicken, you'll find things like chicken thighs or chicken legs are much cheaper, so you can incorporate them in. And definitely with meat, I always say go for the best quality that you can afford and eat less of it. I would much rather have less of something that was perhaps free range or organic than something that had been pumped full of hormones and whatever. The other thing that I suggest is just a really simple thing. Tins of lentils and pulses are really, really cost effective, and they are packed full of nutrition. So I always say, try and swap out half of the ingredients of a recipe with a tin of lentils or a tin of chickpeas. It's a really easy way of incorporating more nutrients without breaking the kind of balance and bank balance, and actually reduces the cost of that recipe quite often. Especially if you're swapping out things like meat with a tin of lentils or chickpeas. The other thing, don't forget frozen fruit and veg and tinned fruit and veg. They're just as nutritious, often sometimes more nutritious, because they haven't been sitting on a supermarket shelf for weeks. So, always with things like berries, for example. Berries are very expensive fresh, aren't they? But actually frozen, they're about a third of the price, and you can just keep them always handy there. They're not going to go off. They last for ages in the freezer, and you can just incorporate them easily into meals. I say eat seasonally when you can. Quite often, if you go to a supermarket, the seasonal fruit and veg will be discounted or reduced, or a lot of supermarkets now do this kind of their top 6 fruits and veg for the week at a discounted rate. So try and eat those kind of seasonal. And that also means that you'll switch up what you're eating as well, because they'll rotate that every week. It'll be something different. I share lots of tips like this in my book as well. Meal planning, if you can, I always make extra and take my leftovers for lunch, because lunch is so expensive to buy, isn't it? If you're buying a ready-made lunch. So quite often I'll just take leftovers and I'll heat that up at work.
Yes, and you are a mother, as you mentioned. So one of your focuses is making sure that, families who are really busy, not just financially strapped, but also really busy and have potentially fussy eaters, you create recipes for them as well. What are some of the tips you have for helping those little fussy eaters, which are fairly common and some parents really struggle with it, what are some of the tips you have for those parents who are time strapped and their kids won't eat anything? How do you help transform those situations so their kids can enjoy a healthy diet and have a better relationship with food?
I mean, this is the $1 million question, isn't it? It's not easy. That's how I would start. It's not easy. And, even now, my kids are 15 and 13. And even now, sometimes, they might have a day where they're not wanting to eat certain things. If I had to give you advice, I would say the two main things are exposure, and consistency with that exposure. So you are just constantly positively reinforcing that exposure. And whether they eat it or not, you have to, and I find this really hard, especially with my kind of background. I think Indian families, we love feeding. And so, sometimes I take it a little bit personally if they're not going to finish everything that I've made, but it's without pressure. So exposure and consistency without that pressure to finish it. And so really, really try and enforce and include that in every mealtime, making it a positive experience without that pressure. And then, other ways I try and include my kids in a lot of the decisions. And when I say including them, it doesn't have to be fully, hey kids, go shopping, because you're just going to get, they're going to come back and your basket's going to be full of biscuits and chocolates and sweets, but include them in certain decisions. So sometimes when I'm sitting, I do an online shop and I'll say, hey guys, are there any vegetables you want to include today? Or are there any purple foods you would like me to add to the basket? Or do you prefer grapes or blueberries this week? That kind of limited inclusion. But yeah, just keeping up with that consistently, because it's very easy to get disheartened, isn't it, when they say, oh, I didn't like that, to never make it again.
Yeah.
Or
particularly if it's food that you really like. I've got two examples of foods that I love that I've never been able to get my kids to eat, and I've even tried hiding them, and then they'll say, have you used that? Things like Jerusalem artichoke, I really enjoy it, and I've tried to hide it in my food. Did you put some Jerusalem artichoke in that food?
And everything, don't they?
And polenta. I love polenta, but we hardly ever eat it as a family because it's the same thing. Every time you try to hide it, they go, did you put that in there? So there are some things you kind of have to go, all right, I accept that, provided that everything else they're happy with. But sometimes it's frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned Jerusalem artichoke because it's great for your gut microbiome. So a really good one for them to be having. But, you and I don't like certain things, right? They're not going to love everything. And don't take that to heart and just keep gently exposing consistently.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. Absolutely. I've learned to move on from those things. The other one is pumpkin, which I really love, but they don't. And one of my favorite things is pumpkin soup, but they won't have it.
Yeah.
So yes, but then you find an alternative, and then you get there eventually. But it's a constant tug of war, isn't it? The other thing that's quite at times I think daunting for all of us is the notion of cooking from scratch, and time might be a problem, but also confidence. I think it's a real art. I think cooking from scratch, and that's something else that you help parents with, and particularly with making sure that that cooking from scratch includes whole foods. Why is it important to reduce our intake of ultra-processed foods and include more whole foods in our diet?
So we know that ultra-processed foods are usually higher in salt, sugar, saturated fats, and all those things that are not good for us from a health perspective. And as I mentioned before, ultra-processed foods and the consumption of ultra-processed foods does increase our risks of disease. I think you mentioned with the kind of risk with certain cancers, including breast cancer. It certainly increases your risk of things like diabetes, ischemic heart disease, obesity. So the more we cook from scratch, the less we are going to be reliant on kind of these ready processed foods. So it's really important from a health perspective, more than just, it's important for our general health to be eating more foods from scratch.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the starting from scratch thing, as I said, can be quite daunting. For those who really don't know where to start, what's a simple first step?
I would say start small. So small, like I mentioned before as well, small sustainable changes that you can keep up long term is the most important. So it might just be that, say you're somebody that's used to buying a ready-made pizza. Maybe you would go from that to perhaps buying a ready-made base. And then you would add things to that base, because we're all about, remember, inclusion rather than what you're excluding from your diet. So we're not going to focus on taking away pizza. We're going to have pizza, but have it in a different way. So you might buy a ready-made base, or you might use like a wholemeal wrap as a base. And I've got a recipe for that where I just make a really simple pizza in my book, where I have a 15-minute meal chapter. And we make a pizza with a wholemeal wrap or a seeded wrap, which is always going to be a better option than that ready-made. And then maybe you would add some vegetables, some peppers or some mushrooms, or something that you wouldn't necessarily get in a ready-made pizza. You might make the sauce base yourself, or just incorporating those kind of small sustainable changes. So you're not going to skip the pizza, you're just going to have it a slightly different way, in a way that works for you. And some people might find the wrap pizza easier, some people might want to make a whole dough from scratch eventually. You just, whatever would work for you, but focus on that inclusion rather than what you're excluding, and focus on those small sustainable changes that you can then maintain long term. I know I say that all the time, but that's the key, because there's no point doing it for 6 weeks if we want overall long-term health. It's got to be something that you can really keep up with over a longer period of time.
Yeah, that you don't find challenging, or that you just don't want to do every day. It needs to be something that you can.
Because you're not going to do it if it's too challenging.
No.
Or you don't enjoy it. You're not going to do it. So there's no point me saying, hey, don't eat pizza, have a quinoa salad instead, because that's just too big a change, isn't it? Whereas a small change would just be the way you made that pizza.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you also have a lot of experience working with people from all different communities, from also different socioeconomic backgrounds and ethnicities. Why is it, in your view, you mentioned this earlier on, why is it important to understand the cultural context when it comes to helping people create, healthy habits?
I think it's really important, actually. Food is really deeply personal and really tied to culture. I think I mentioned earlier about coming from an Indian background. Food is everything. You would not enter an Indian household without being fed. That's what we do. And if we don't take that culture into account, actually, it's just not going to resonate with that person that you're trying to speak to. And I think it's really important that you can try and meet people where they're at with kind of practical, culturally sensitive advice to be able to get that change, because otherwise it won't resonate with them. They're not going to do it. And there is no point coming into somebody that's maybe for 50, 60 odd years eaten the same type of meal to say, hey, let's switch that up and have this kind of granola and oats for breakfast, because actually that's just not sensitive to what is their norm, and doesn't resonate with them in any way, and they're just not going to do it. You're just not going to get to where you want to without addressing that cultural context.
And on that, do you feel there's enough resources available for these different cultural groups and people on low income, and those potentially also with language barriers?
I don't think there is, which is why I first wrote that 50p recipe book. It's for a charity that approached me called Be Enriched, which is essentially they're a food charity. They run a food bank, they run a community kitchen, and a lot of people that come to that kitchen, they aren't able to access that information. And there are barriers like language, culture, to access that health information. And so it was something that I wrote to just try and reach out to that group. But we really do have to acknowledge that things like cost, access, language, they're all real barriers to sending that message. And I know, budgets are not unlimited, but certainly those are groups where we see sometimes more disease as a result. And so actually maybe that is where we need to focus more, because that's where we're going to make the biggest change. There's no point reaching out and being able to access the well and the worried well. We actually need to go to the people that need it the most, and who it would give the biggest impact to.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? Because the worried well are very motivated, and therefore they'll access our information, and by virtue of that, we will be able to be more responsive to their needs, because they're very clear around what their needs are. But how do you think organisations such as ours, Breast Cancer UK, I mean, we're very concerned with developing education and reaching people who, as you say, have got barriers. What are some tips you could give organisations such as ours for being able to cut through some of those barriers?
How could you do it? I'm just thinking,
if you can give us the answer, that'd be great.
I'm just thinking, at the time that we're recording, Diwali's coming up. So that's where you're going to get a lot of Indian communities meeting up and together, and probably a lot of festivals, a lot of opportunities where people would be together, and maybe reaching out to those kind of more specific groups at specific times might be a way. So you've got Eid, Diwali, cultural festivals where you might see groups of people meeting up. And there are often in certain areas, you will get kind of big festivals around these auspicious times. So maybe that's a good time to reach out to community groups. There are always kind of a lot of kind of minority groups that will be set up. So reaching out to those kind of community groups, perhaps. I know over time, when COVID was, when it was the COVID period, I did a lot of outreach to specific ethnic minority groups, because in terms of vaccination and things like that, where people weren't accessing vaccines or accessing information, just to help share health education. So I guess, you do have to physically go out and search these groups to be able to, because they're not always going to come to you, I guess.
No, that's right. And that is a great tip, isn't it? Going out into communities, and particularly the cultural calendar time, where people are more likely to be congregating, and going out to share information is a perfect opportunity, really.
Yeah, definitely.
I wanted to ask you also about your Instagram. So you're very active on Instagram, and we know social media is not always healthy. There can be a spreading of misinformation, but it's also a really valuable tool, and it looks like you make a lot of use of that as well. So what made you start posting your food on Instagram? And for you, has it been a really positive way to connect and to create those bridges with communities?
Yeah, I've had a lot of support on Instagram. It's been amazing. And I think social media is something that weirdly everybody seems to access. There are a lot of people that access social media, and I think you're going to actually get to people that might not seek out nutrition advice elsewhere. So these might be people that aren't going to look on the NHS website for information, or read particular books regarding health information. So I think it's a really great way of reaching out to groups that may not otherwise seek that advice. What made me start, it was actually a friend of mine who, because I'm quite new to social media, believe it or not. I didn't even have a social media account, say 8-9 years ago, before I started this. My first Instagram account was to share my food. And when I started, there weren't really many medics, many doctors on social media at all. There was a lot of nutrition noise. There were some nutritionists and really good dietitians as well, who were really great, trusted voices. But it just made me think, hey, there's information, but there isn't that practical side where you can interpret that information and put it into real life. And hopefully, being a doctor, that gives me that slight trusted voice that people might be more open to listening to. And one of my friends said, you've got to start, she was always asking me for recipes, and she said, you've got to start sharing this so other people can have it. And she actually set it up for me because I didn't know how to use Instagram. And so I used to send her a photo and a recipe, and she would put it on. And then she said, actually, you need to start doing this yourself now, because I'm doing this for you every day. And so she taught me how to use it. And then it just kind of grew from there. And lots of opportunities have come through from there, and I'm, really grateful for the fact that I am able to reach people with a health message, and I seem to get positive feedback from that. So I'm glad it's helpful.
Great. And you also do regular BBC food videos as well, is that right? Good food videos?
Yeah, so a few years ago I started writing for Good Food, and I still pinch myself, but I have a column with them in their magazine, so I write for them every month, and we pick a topic every month, and I will usually talk about that topic and then reference it to nutrition and health, so how we can, for example, I think this month's topic was menopause. So how we can,
great topic.
so a little bit about menopause and just the basic menopause advice, but then going into kind of what foods we should try and incorporate into our diet to help with menopause, what foods we should be avoiding in our diets to help our symptoms, and then just simple, really lifestyle measures that you could be taking to try and improve your health during menopause. And then, as always, there is a recipe to show you how to put that kind of theory into practice in your kitchen. So I think we made tempeh burgers this month's issue. So just showing you how to perhaps twist, a kind of really common recipe, common meal that might not be so healthy, like a burger, and just how we can tweak some of the ingredients to make it actually really a healthy meal. But I love working for them, so I write some of their meal plans and am involved in some of their festivals and shows, which is fab. Love it.
I'm sure people will be very interested in having a look at all your recipes. This brings us to the end of our interview, but there are a couple of questions that we like to ask all of our guests, and I hope you'll indulge us. The first one really is, you're full of great advice. You're a GP, you're a nutritionist, but do you have any guilty pleasures?
So I'm not a nutritionist.
You're a nutrition expert. Sorry, yeah.
So guilty pleasures. First of all, I would say I don't view it as guilty, because I really don't think we should label any foods as guilt, because I think it's really important to have a balanced approach to food, and to kind of step away from that kind of labeling of food, because food actually brings joy as well as nourishment. But I love chocolate. So if I had to pick something, it would be chocolate.
Yeah, well, I call it my weakness, but it's also my strength, because I love it, but I can control this love for it as well, because I think if I could indulge myself all the time with it, because I love it so much, but it's a really special thing, chocolate, and I couldn't imagine depriving myself of it.
Absolutely. And if you are having chocolate, go for dark chocolate, because it's packed full of nutrients and fiber. Do you know chocolate contains?
Oh, really? Gosh, no, I didn't know that. I knew it had antioxidant properties, but I didn't know it had fiber as well. So it's not so bad for you, is it, if you have a little bit of it? What about anything you'd like to recommend to our listeners? So a book or a podcast or even a film that's inspired you?
So a podcast that I love, that I listen to, is Dr. Rangan Chatterjee's podcast, Feel Better, Live More. And the reason I love his books and his podcast is because they are science-backed, and he covers lifestyle on the whole. So it's not just food and nutrition, because there's a lot more to your health than just food and nutrition. So, and I love listening to him. I think he gets some really great guests on, some real world-leading experts. So it's a brilliant podcast, and all his books are really, really good. So that's what I would recommend.
And what about yourself? What are your plans for the future? Anything exciting you want to share with us that either you've got planned or you'd like to do?
Well, there's nothing planned. But, hey, I would love ultimately to have, a TV show where I'm cooking and putting this into practice and reaching huge amounts of people with what I do. Who knows, watch this space. I'd love to actually be able to reach more. There's a limit on Instagram and social media and via books, how many people you can reach. So in an ideal world, I'd love to spread my message to a much wider community. And in particular, I have a real passion for kids cooking. as well. You know, I'm really proud to say that both my children actually can cook independently, and I know
that is an important life skill.
I know that when they go to university, they'll be able to cook for themselves. And I also know that sometimes when they don't like what I've made, they go and make something else, which drives me mad. But, you know, hey, they're actually independently able to do that, and they know what they want and they know what they like, which is, you know, a pro. So, yeah, I would love to incorporate that somehow into some kind of show that I could help teach children and families to just get cooking more.
Brilliant. Well, judging by what you've achieved so far, I'm sure you can make it happen, and we'll certainly keep an eye out for your ongoing success. And where can people find out about you now? You've got your Insta page.
So you can find me on all socials, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube at Dr. Chintal's Kitchen, or you can pick up a copy of my book, which is also titled Dr. Chintal's Kitchen after my account. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been, you know, really fascinating hearing about your work. I'm really looking forward to digging into your book, which I've ordered, and also to keeping up with all your wonderful work. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to chat. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Be Well podcast, brought to you by Breast Cancer UK, a prevention charity supporting people to build healthy, lifelong habits and reduce their risk of developing breast cancer. You can start your personal prevention journey right now by taking our prevention quiz. Just click on the link in the show notes.